you've been in behind the scenes for a while. I mean, with the martial arts, there's a story you told me of you saw Bruce Lee, and Chuck Norris spar as a kid. Can you tell us more?
Yeah, well, I mean, I started, as a kid in Tong Soo Do, and this is before Chuck was an actor, to the extent that he's an actor now. But anyway, he had these facilities. One of them, literally, just down the hill here in Sherman Oaks, and he used to have a ton of people coming in there working out, and so my father, he retired, at least that time when he retired a few times, and so he had a lot of free time, so he started going over there. He was training, and so I got in. I started training there as a kid, and long story short is that my father is training with Chuck, doing privates, and Chuck says, I got a guy I want you to work with, and he has a lot of free time, and I think you guys will be great together. And my dad says, okay, that sounds great to me. So he shows up. There's this guy with this beard. He can't even recognize him, except for he had these smashing blue piercing eyes coming out. It was Steve McQueen. So Chuck put my father and Steve together, and they trained together for years.
Wow.
Right up until he got sick and became good friends. But part of that story is that the whole group that was there, because then Steve really brought Chuck into acting. He said, I'm going to get you an acting coach. You're going to do this. We're going to do it like that. And my father was like, well, what are you doing that for? This is our instructor. We just lost our guy.
Right.
Like, what are you doing? So, and who was left was Bob Wall, O'Hara, right?
Enter the Dragon.
Yeah, and Pat Johnson. And so they started working with Bob Wall, and then they were working with Pat Johnson. And then after that, for years, they worked with Pat Johnson. But part of this whole group, because they had, they called it point fighting back then, but it was contact. It was heavy contact. And they had this whole group that would work out a couple of days a week. And so included in this group was some of the greatest kickboxers that I had ever seen. And I was a kid growing up taking karate and started doing kickboxing. And I'm watching these workouts, and there's like Joe Louis working out with Chuck, and Bill Superfoot Wallace. And one guy after another. And every time I would work out with Pat, he would bring somebody different to train. So I got to spar with all these guys. I mean, it was a blast. But then, one of their friends was Bruce Lee. And Bruce would train with all of them. And so I remember going and watching Bruce working out with Bob Wall and Chuck and Pat Johnson. And it was, and like to think about it now, it's like, oh my God, that was insane.
Right.
At the time, it was like, oh, well, there's Chuck and there's,
So there was MMA before there was MMA.
Yeah.
What years was this around?
Jeez. I'd have to figure that out. I can't even remember what year it was.
The 70s, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was early.
Early 70s.
Yeah.
Now, what happened when Bruce would spar with Chuck or
That's right. That's the big question, right?
That's
What
a big
happened?
question. What happened?
Right?
Because Chuck is naturally bigger, right? Is he?
Yes.
Yes.
He was a middleweight,
180, about 85.
but he fought at about 60
Okay.
when
So-
he was competitive.
So he fought at 60,
I believe he fought about 60,
and Bruce was about 35.
40, 35, 40, but like shredded.
So Chuck had 20 pounds on Bruce.
Yeah, so if you said, well, let's take two guys who are very technical, and one guy's got a 20 or 25 or 30 pound weight advantage, what's going to happen? Well, the guy who's lighter, if he's really fast, maybe he's going to hit him 15 or 20 times.
Right.
The bigger guy, if he hits him once or twice, it might be bad.
So what happened between Bruce and Chuck?
It went back and forth. These were two of the greatest martial artists I'd ever seen, and their control was off the chart. And they never tried to hurt each other. It was so. There were situations where Bruce, you know, where he clearly had something, and he would, you know, just kind of put it right there. You know, same with Chuck. That, you know, Chuck had that patented super fast spinning back kick, you know, where he'd throw the fake jab and right into the spinning back kick.
Like a Wonder Boy Thompson.
Yeah, like that, except
he was it.
years earlier, but yeah. And the footwork was so different back then. I mean, there was footwork. That's my point. You know, nobody now, with the exception of maybe, you know, Wonder Boy, okay, and GSP, but there are very few guys that train both feet forward, lunges, slide ups, in and out, all the stuff that all the formal karate point fighters used to do for years. You know, I mean, I wish the guys would do more of it. I think it's really good.
And it works. I mean, Wonder Boy went off of Hendricks and Rory McDonald, which
annihilated him.
Right.
Yeah.
Which you were saying, well, does this still work? I mean, a little Machida-esque, but more American kickboxing, I would say, or karate.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of karate going on there, and he's I think he's morphed it pretty well. You know, I think he's done a good job at that.
And so would Bruce knock Chuck down a few times, and Chuck would knock Bruce down a few times? Is that kind of how it went?
It was pretty even. But, you know, I mean, let's face it. Okay, if Chuck wanted to hurt him, you know, if he could hit him, it would hurt. You know.
And well, back then, I mean, was there a lot of grappling done? I mean, it didn't seem like there was as much grappling as there. I see some Bruce Lee footage where he's doing an arm bar, but that didn't seem to be
it was, you know, there was a little bit of it. In particular, Pat Johnson, you know, he had a very long relationship with Gene LaBelle, and he used to bring Gene in for seminars all the time. So Pat was always moving his students along to understand things that happen on the street, you know, more accurately, and not just doing all the forms and, you know, all the formal karate stuff. And and then, you know, obviously, you know, Chuck started working with the Machados. So, I mean, yeah, if they were on the ground where they were rolling around and, you know, like right. Today, like you would see, no, you know, if it hit the ground, stand it back up.
Right. Now, last question to round this up on if Chuck Norris was in the UFC at say he fought at 60, either lightweight or welterweight, could he be champ?
Yeah. Yeah, he was totally adaptable, and his skills for striking were so strong, and his technique was so good. And that's like one of the things is how many of the guys that come up now do 5,000 front kicks, you know, in a series of a few weeks, you know, working on, you know, pulling their toes back, working on getting their knee, bringing their knee back, down, up, that, like, okay. And, you know, it's like a lot of everybody goes, oh, well, what do we need to do that for? It's not going to, well, it does help.
Right.
I mean, that's the technique. It's like the same thing as crafting, you know, a world championship wrestler, their technique. I watched this kid, Joey Davis. Kid's unbelievable. Bellator just signed him. And watched him roll a few weeks ago. And, I mean, not only was his wrestling off the chart, and it was all technique, and he was like a freak of nature, but his striking, he was going left foot forward, right foot forward. He was throwing round kicks, heel kick, and like it was nothing. I mean, he looked like a smaller John Jones, but maybe better.
Wow. Scary.
That's what right? I mean, it was.
But what about Bruce Lee? He's at 35, 45. Could he beat Aldo in his prime? Could he beat Cruz?
I don't know. Listen, after watching Aldo, this past weekend, I don't know how anybody could beat him.
McGregor.
Again, you know, I don't know. I mean, the way that he won that fight sets up the rematch.
Right.
I mean, it really sets up the rematch very nicely because it makes the other one look like such a fluke, you know? I mean, because Aldo was he was phenomenal.